A forgotten, one-off villain from a Godzilla video game once had a very different legacy in front of him, being the final boss of the 1990s movie series. Also known as the Heisei series, this era in Godzilla's history began with his fight against humanity in Return of Godzilla and ended with his death in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. A story spanning 7 movies, the Heisei series saw him go up against a host of dangerous threats, including Space Godzilla, Violent, Batra, new versions of King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla, and, of course, Destoroyah, who cemented his status as one of the greatest villains in Godzilla's rogues gallery. Destoroyah never made another appearance in the Godzilla franchise, but one movie was all that was needed for Destoroyah to develop the level of notoriety that he still holds today. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah introduced the kaiju as an incredibly powerful foe, one that pushed Godzilla to his limit. In fact, he even went as far as to kill Godzilla Jr., the once adorable monster from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. This created the setup for Godzilla's swan song, as the king of the monsters ended his journey defeating Destoroyah and dying in a blaze of glory. With his death and Destoroyah's defeat, the Heisei series came to a sad yet beautiful end. Prior to the conception of Destoroyah, it was understood that the then untitled Godzilla movie was to be the kaiju's final outing. Due to dwindling box office returns, Toho was ready to close the door on the franchise, at least for the time being. To that end, it had wanted to make sure the movie was a proper send-off for Godzilla. For that to work, he needed a villain who could feel like his ultimate adversary. The obvious options, King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla, had already been beaten by this version of Godzilla, so it made sense to turn to someone else instead. The first candidate to enter serious consideration was Bagan. Bagan was born from the mind of none other than Tomoyuki Tanaka, the legendary creator of Godzilla. Bagan was envisioned as an ancient force of destruction. The central premise behind the monster was that he possessed the ability to shapeshift. Altogether, he had 3 different forms he could use in battle, each possessing its own distinguishing physical characteristics and abilities. The idea for Godzilla to fight Bagan didn't originate with the movie that ultimately became Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Rather, the idea was developed more than a decade earlier, as late as 1980, but went unused for years. The prospect of Godzilla fighting Bagan was revived for his final film. Presumably, his menacing design and multiple transformations were what inspired the idea that he could fill the role of Godzilla's greatest opponent ever. Exactly what the story would have been is unclear, as ideas for Bagan's origin have varied. However, there are some clues about the plot, as recounted by the Big Book of Giant Japanese Monster Movies. The Lost Films, G-Fan number 12 claimed that the spirits of Rodan and Mothra were to return after their respective deaths in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Godzilla vs. Mothra and assist in Bagan's defeat. As for Godzilla, he was to absorb enough nuclear radiation to enter into a transformation called Super Godzilla, with which he would use to beat Bagan. However, this explanation has never been verified. Rather than pivot away from Bagan to Destoroyah, there was another monster that acted as a stepping stone between the two ideas. Varan, the titular antagonist of Varan the Unbelievable, and one of the many kaiju cameos in Destroy All Monsters, was the next option Toho looked at after Bagan. After dropping Varan, the movie evolved into Godzilla vs. Giant Monster Varan. Since Varan had already been established in Varan the Unbelievable as a versatile creature that can fight in the air, the water, and on land, Godzilla vs. Giant Monster Varan was going to lean into that to make Varan a world-ending threat, and in turn, the ultimate opponent for Godzilla. But in the end, Toho rejected that plan as well, finally setting on a completely new creature, Destoroyah. As a product of the Oxygen Destroyer, the weapon that killed the 1954 Godzilla, no monster made better sense than Destoroyah as Godzilla's final opponent. The abandon of batting Super Godzilla ties in neatly with the plot of a Godzilla video game released in 1993 titled Super Godzilla. In the last level, Godzilla squares off against Godzilla versus King Ghidorah's Mecha King Ghidorah, and in the process of winning, the player can make Godzilla transform into Super Godzilla. If that happens, an extra stage is unlocked where Godzilla, in his Super Godzilla form, fights Bagan.